Hi, this is lesson number 7 of God's Promises and Prophecies, and we're in the book of Joshua, and we'll finish Joshua this evening, and that will be the 6th book of the Bible that we will have finished through this Bible study. So I think we're doing pretty well as far as working our way through, not that we're in a rush, but we haven't even got to the books of the prophecies yet. The prophets, and we've had plenty to talk about in these non-prophecy books. So Joshua, the book of Joshua, Joshua was the person who was designated to take over after Moses died, and last week we had that Moses died at 120. They don't know where he was buried, and he was in great shape but died. I questioned the pastor about that. I found that odd, that he was in supposedly great health, good vigor, and yet he died. So God just designated that was his time to go, or what? I don't know. So in Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 9 is what we're going to read in the first chapter of Joshua. And especially look at verse 3, where it says, "Every place the sole of your foot treads upon, I have given to you." And again, it's a pretty significant promise from God. He's telling the Israelites that when they step over into this new land, everywhere that their foot touches is going to become their property. And they've been promised this land since Abraham. And now they're this close to actually going in to claim it. And he once again gives the land boundaries, different ones, but it outlines again from this river to that land is where you're going to have as your promised land. And in verse 5, he tells Joshua that that God's going to be with him. I will not leave you or forsake you. I will be with you, just as he was with Moses. And again, Joshua has been a warrior. He's not shown any fear. He's been courageous through what we've read about him up until this point. And then in verse 7, God says, "Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to the law." So again, this hinges on obedience by the Israelites and by Joshua. And he also tells him in verse 8 to meditate this book of the law, which is what they've got to this point, is what we've read about in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. They have laws about how to set up their tabernacle, which is a tent at this point, how their priests are to conduct their business, how to do the feasts, how to do the offerings. That's their law at this point. And they've got the 10 Commandments. And in verse 8, "This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success." So, as he's told them before, if you're obedient, you're going to have all these blessings. And so he's reiterating that once again, that their part in this is obedience. So this was partially fulfilled, and you can see that in Joshua 21, chapter 21, verses 43, 44, and 45. And it says, "Thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land that he swore to give to their fathers, and they took possession of it, and they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one of all their enemies had withstood them, for the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass." So at this point in Joshua 21, every part of the promised land that they've gone into, they've been victorious in. We're going to read, it had a little bump, but they eventually conquered it. But today they don't have all of that promised land. and we'll touch on that later too. It will be fully fulfilled. This land possession, again, depended on their obedience, and they were not obedient. And so in Amos chapter 9, verses 14 and 15, I should have had that one marked. So let me find it. Amos is a little book in the middle of all the prophet books. Jonah, Obadiah, there's Amos. So Amos chapter 9, verses 14 and 15 reads, I will restore the fortunes of my people Israel, and they shall rebuild the ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine, and they shall make gardens and eat their fruit. I will plant them on their land, and they shall never again be uprooted out of the land that I have given them, says the Lord your God. So this is a prophecy that Amos gave years later, and that's a futuristic one. Israel to this day has not had possession of all that God has promised them, but it's coming. So then we move to back in chapter 1 of Joshua to verse 16, which reads, Israel says, Joshua is telling him all this that God told him. And Israel tells Joshua, all that you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. So they're talking a good talk, but we know that this is not true. They said that they will obey just like they did with Moses. Well, that might be true because they didn't obey Moses. So they've forgotten, I guess, how many times they've gone against what Moses told them to do, and God punished them in that 40 years. The whole 40 years was a punishment for disobeying. So they mean to say, oh, we're going to be behind you just like we were with Moses. But what they said really was true, that they follow him just like they did Moses, which was not very well. So in Joshua chapter 3, verses 7 to 17, I'm not talking about a promise there, but I did want to bring out that Israel crosses the Jordan River on dry ground, similar to what happened with Moses, and he held up his arm and staff and held it out over the water, and the water split and they went across on dry ground. Joshua does a similar thing in chapter 3 on the river Jordan, and they cross over on dry ground. Just thought it was of interest that God did a similar thing twice in the Bible. Then we move to chapter 5, Joshua chapter 5. And again, it's not really that I'm bringing this out for a prophecy or by a promise or prophecy, but I wanted to just touch on this because it is an interesting little blurb, a couple sentences in the Bible. So they have this, they're at Jericho, which is going to be their next big battle. And Joshua is there by Jericho, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him. Again, most people would have ran in fear, but Joshua was like, no, I'm going to go up and talk to him. And Joshua went to him and said, are you for us or for our adversaries? Again, this could have been an enemy. Joshua didn't know. God told him to not have fear, be courageous, and Joshua is exemplifying that because he walks right up to this person without knowing if they're friend or foe. And the person says, no, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come. Okay, so I'm taking that as it's an angel, a warrior angel. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, What does my Lord say to his servant? And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. And that's similar again to what Moses experienced with the burning bush, as they told him to take off his sandals because he was standing on holy ground. Again, just was an interesting thing that I thought wanted to touch on. And then we move to chapter 6 and verses 1 through 27. Not going to read all of that, but that whole chapter is on the Battle of Jericho. And we've had songs about that in Bible school, Sunday school. And it's basically, they told Israel to, this is their second big battle. The first battle was the one with the Amalekites, and now this is their second one. And they are to march around the city once every day for 6 days. So we march around one, they're done. And I've read accounts where that's a pretty big task, would just be to walk around Jericho once in a day. It was a large city. And then on the seventh day, they're to go around 7 times. So again, it makes you wonder, if it's a stretch to make you go once, how do you get 7 in a day? But that's what they did. And then when they finished that 7th round, blow the trumpet and shout, and the walls were just going to fall down. And so they proceed to do that. And in verse 17 of chapter 6, it reads, and at the 7th time, when the priest had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And the city and all that is within it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. So he's telling them, shout, the walls are going to fall, and we're going to go in, and anything that's in that city is going to be destroyed. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. So to find out more about this Rahab, you have to go back to Joshua chapter 2. And she was a prostitute in the city, and Israel had sent Israel spies over to kind of scope out this property. And she hid them and got them away out of the city by putting out a scarlet cord. And again, that scarlet cord, they talk about the scarlet cord that runs throughout the whole Bible, indicates Jesus. But she used this red cord, and that was a signal to get these spies, keep them safe. And they promise that they will take care of her for doing this. And Joshua is reiterating that here, is that you're going to destroy everything, but you don't destroy Rahab. And when you get over to the New Testament and they go down through the genealogy of Jesus, Rahab is mentioned in that genealogy. So here she is, a prostitute, and you think, God can't use people. I'm not good enough. I've done things in my life I'm not proud of. But here she is. So in Matthew chapter 1, if you start reading at verse 1, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham, and that was important for him to be identified as the Messiah, is that he needed to have that lineage to David and the lineage to Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob. Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. That's all the 12 tribes. And Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. And Perez the father of Hezron. And Hezron the father of Ram. And Ram the father of Amminadab. And Amminadab the father of Nahshon. And Nahshon the father of Salmon. And Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab. So Boaz was Rahab's son, and again, he was quite respected when we read about him in the book of Ruth. And again, his mother was a prostitute. So in a generation, they've gone from being a prostitute, you would assume, not well looked upon, to Boaz, who is well respected and very wealthy and a landowner. And Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth. and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David the king. And then it goes on beyond that. But Rahab forever has a place in the history and the lineage of Jesus Christ, our Savior, from this section back in the Old Testament. For her keeping those spies, it turned into her being in the lineage of the Messiah, the future Messiah. Pretty cool. And then in verse 26 of chapter 6, after Jericho is destroyed, Joshua says, "Cursed before the Lord be the man who rises up and rebuilds this city Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn shall he lay its foundation. At the cost of his youngest son shall he set up his gates." So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was in all the land. So again, little sentence. Think, okay, doesn't mean much, but that was fulfilled in 1 Kings chapter 16. Verse 34, which reads, "In his days, Hiel, Hiel of Bethel, built Jericho," which is what they said, cursed be anybody who rebuilds the city. "He laid its foundations at the cost of Abiram, his firstborn," and that's what that prophecy said, "and set up its gate at the cost of his youngest son, Segub," I don't know, Segub, "according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by Joshua the son of Nun." It says it does not say specifically how the two sons died. It's possible he offered them a sacrifice, or the day they died is a special judgment from God. In fulfillment of Joshua's curse, they did have child sacrifice back in those times of the people who worshipped gods other than the one true God. They did child sacrifice. So we don't know what happened, but it does say that the man who rebuilt Jericho, he did lose two sons because of what he did with rebuilding it. So again, God doesn't mess around, and what he says he's going to do, he does. And we may not like it, but that's what it says. So then we move into Joshua chapter 7, and again, verses 1 through 29. I'm not going to read all of that, but now they're going into more battles, and they when they took over Jericho, somebody in the ranks of the warriors, the people of Israel, took some of the devoted things. Now, I don't know what the devoted things are. They weren't worshiping God, so it wasn't like it was the things, out of our temple. But God had told them to destroy everything. He didn't tell them to take anything. They didn't get to plunder. They didn't get to keep silver, gold. He told them to destroy it. And so you had somebody who, again, felt they knew better than God and decided they would keep a little of this stuff. It'd be okay. And it wasn't okay. So God became angry over them keeping these devoted things. And so he brings them defeat in their next battle. And this disturbs them because they've had two great battles and two great successes so far. And now all of a sudden they go in, and God's told them that everywhere they step their foot, they're going to get possession. He's going to be with them. He's going to give them victory. And they have this defeat, and they're like, hey, what's going on? So in verse 6 of chapter 7, it says, "Joshua tore his clothes and fell to the earth on his face before the ark of the Lord until the evening, he and the elders of Israel." And so their response was to go and fall before God and basically pray. And they put dust on their heads, which is a sign of humility and repentance. And Joshua said, "Alas, O Lord God, why have you brought this people over the Jordan at all to give us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us. Would that we had been content to dwell beyond the Jordan. Doesn't that sound like what the Israelites had kept saying? Every time something didn't go right, they'd say, oh, woe is us. Why did you bring us? Why did you bring us over here just to kill us? And, oh Lord, what can I say when Israel has turned their backs before their enemies? For the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land will hear of it and will surround us and cut off our name from the earth. And what will you do for your great name? And the Lord answers Joshua in verse 10 and says, get up. Why have you fallen on your face? Israel has sinned. They have transgressed my covenant that I commanded them. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen and lied and put them among their own belongings. Therefore the people of Israel cannot stand before their enemies. They turn their backs before their enemies because they have become devoted for destruction. I will be with you no more unless you destroy the devoted things from among you. Get up, consecrate the people, and say, consecrate yourselves for tomorrow, for thus says the Lord, the God of Israel. There are devoted things in your midst, O Israel. You cannot stand before your enemies until you take away the devoted things from among you. In the morning, therefore, you shall be brought near by your tribes, and the tribe that the Lord takes by lot shall come near by clans, and the clan that the Lord takes shall come near by households, and the household that the Lord takes shall come near man by man, and he who is taken with the devoted things shall be burned with fire, he and all that he has, because he has transgressed the covenant of the Lord, and because he has done an outrageous thing in Israel. Whoa. Okay, so God's not messing around. They were told not to do this. They disobeyed. Joshua did the right thing and threw himself kind of on the mercy of God and said, why, I don't understand why. And God tells him why. Joshua didn't know this, that someone has sinned. They've taken these things. And so back in that time, they did what they called casting lots. So they're going to bring each of the 12 tribes up. And by casting lots, God's going to say that it's this tribe. Then they're going to bring each household up or clan up within that tribe. Remember, there's over 1 million people by now. And they're going to say it's within this clan. And then they're going to bring each of the clans up, or the households within the clan, and they'll keep casting lots. And they'll identify a household. And then they're going to identify who the person is, man by man, who did this awful thing. And they're going to be destroyed. They're going to be burned. And that's exactly what happens. So the culprit is found, and they stone them. I believe it's not just him, but his and his family, and they burn them. So again, not nice, but again, God doesn't mess around. He tells you not to do something, you're not to do it. And so that wraps up chapter 7 on not a great note, but it does say at the end of the chapter, the last sentence is that the Lord turned from his burning anger, and therefore to this day the name of that place is called the Valley of Acre. And that just hit me. The Valley of Acre means, I think, the Valley of Hope. Oh, Valley of Trouble, sorry. That is part of one of my favorite verses that's over in the book of Hosea, who was a prophet, and that he takes them out to the Valley of Acre, the Valley of Trouble, but that's where he restores them. And it just hit me that that's another mention of that same place. So that's just kind of a cool thing for me, because that's one of my favorite verses over in Hosea. So they've called this the Valley of Trouble. They've heaped up stones. They've burned. They've memorialized that this is where this awful thing has happened. And then we move into Joshua 8. So they were set to have this battle, and God brought them defeat because of this sin, and now he says, go fight them again. And most people would be a little gun shy to be like, I don't want to go fight them again. I mean, we just had this terrible defeat at their hands, but God's saying, no, this time it'll be okay. We've erased this sin that was the problem before. So they go, and they obey, and they fight them again, and this time they win. And then we skip over to Joshua chapter 10, and the king of Jerusalem sees the writing on the wall. He sees that Israel is attacking, nation by nation, tribe by tribe, coming into the promised land, and he knows his time is coming, that he's going to have to battle with these people. He doesn't want to. He doesn't trust that he is going to be able to defeat the Israelites. They haven't been defeated yet. So he gets the bright idea that he'll go and get some reinforcements. So he approaches 5 other kings for 5 other nations that are yet to be fought, and he asks them if they will get an alliance ready, and so all 6 nations will fight them. Anytime any of their nations are attacked, they'll be facing 6 nations, not just 1 nation. And so the other 5 kings say, sure, that's a great idea, we'll do that. But in verse 8 of chapter 10, God tells Joshua, do not fear, which he's told him over and over again in his time. And in verse 11, they're actually in the battle, and it reads, and as they fled before Israel while they were going down the ascent of Beth Horon, the Lord threw down large stones, which is hailstones, from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. And there were more who died because of the hailstones, and the sons of Israel killed with the sword. So this king of Jerusalem decides he'll get this alliance of 5 kings ready. They go into battle, and God kills more of the enemy with hailstones than Israel has to kill with their swords. And again, if you go way back to in one of the prior books we were talking about, God told him that he would drive them out before them, so that they're not going in there and having to kill all these people themselves and have that kind of on their hands and their conscience. So this is an example of that, is he killed more by hailstones than they had to kill by the sword. So they are killing, but God is killing more people in other ways. So everybody sees this, and in chapter 12 and 13 of verses 12 and 13 of chapter 10, Joshua, this battle is going on, and he asks that the sun stand still at Gibeon and the moon in the valley of Aijalon. And the sun stood still and the moon stopped until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. And is this not written in the book of Jashar? The sun stopped in the midst of heaven and did not hurry to set for about a whole day. There has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. So my concordance says, the traditional understanding of this passage is that it refers to a miracle of cosmic proportions in which the earth ceased rotating for a time. Since the Bible unquestionably teaches that God brought the universe into existence and that he owns and rules it all for his own purposes, this certainly would be possible. As alternatives to the traditional understanding, a number of possibilities have been proposed. A solar eclipse, however, that's problematic, as the sun and the moon are described in opposition, not conjunction. Poetic imagery, a day that seemed prolonged by virtue of how much was accomplished. Or 3, a day in which the sun's heat was diminished, perhaps by cloud cover, allowing Israelite troops to continue fighting. And 4, a refraction of light, causing the light to linger until the battle was completed. An additional possibility proposed more recently suggests that 5, Joshua is exploring the Canaanite superstitious fear of a bad omen related to the position of the sun and the moon standing on the opposing horizons, the sun at Gibeon and the moon in the valley of Aijalon. None of these proposals are without difficulties, however, and each fails to do justice to the claim that there has been no day like it before or since. Given the miracle-working God of the Bible, the traditional understanding is certainly possible. This is paralleled in Isaiah chapter 38, verse 8, where the sun's shadow moves backwards 10 steps. And so anyway, we don't know, we take it as Christians, what God said is what God did. And it said that it appears that God answered Joshua's prayer, and that he heeded the voice. What Joshua had asked him to do was to be with him in battle. and this book of Jashar is, it appears to be some book of poetry or songs about things that happened. You know, they like Miriam had a song, Moses had a song. They wrote these songs and would chant them and recite them. I guess that's how they handed down their heritage, probably. But anyway, so the sun stood still, the moon stopped. These 5 kings, they're freaked out. They've seen hail destroy the people. They've seen the sun stand still and the moon stand still. And so they run and hide. They're not sticking around to help this king of Jerusalem. They're done. They're out of here. And Joshua in chapter 10, verses 29 to 42, the end of it, is it summarizes all the victories that they've had in southern Canaan. And chapter 11, they go right into the victories in northern Canaan. And once again, a cluster of kings tries to join forces against Israel, but Israel is victorious, and they didn't have any more incidents of sinning and stealing and the things that they did that caused them to not have that one victory. So they are working their way through the land of Canaan, the promised land, conquering the parts of it, and to finish up Joshua, in Joshua chapter 21, verses 43, 44, and 45 is what I read earlier, and that it says that not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass. And so that wraps that up. Is that Joshua was this great warrior. He was the leader after Moses, and they've entered into the promised land, and they're wiping out people as they go. So that's what God has told them to do. And so far, they've been obedient, with the one exception of the guy that was stoned. So that finishes up Joshua. We will start Judges on the next lesson, lesson 8. And I will do that from on the road. I'm on the road next Tuesday. So have a good evening. Again, if you have questions, you can comment. When the video is posted, you can comment questions or comments about something else. Anyway, so I look forward to seeing you on lesson 7.